Chapter 1. The Invisible Daughter. The thin light woke her before the bells. Seraphine lay still beneath thin blankets, staring at the ceiling's familiar cracks while the household stirred beyond her door. She rose without hurry. The wash basin held cold water. She splashed her face and dressed in the gray-brown dress laid out the night before, mended at the elbow, faded at the hem, deliberately forgettable. In the cracked mirror above the basin, her reflection looked back, dark red hair pulled back, freckled skin pale in the dawn, jaw marked by a pale scar she'd stopped explaining years ago. The corridor outside her door swallowed her footsteps. She moved through Thornwood like smoke present but unseen, necessary but unvalued. The great hall opened before her as she descended, and there, descending the opposite staircase, Margot blazed like a banner. Crimson silk cascaded from her sister's shoulders, embroidered with gold thread that caught every flicker of candlelight. Dark hair curled precisely atop her head, rubies at her throat caught light and held it. She looked, as always, like a painting of noble womanhood, the kind hung in halls to declare power. Lord Corrin waited at the hall's foot, his smile broad and approving. There she is. My eldest? Ready to charm Lord Ashford into perdition, father. Margot descended the last steps and accepted his kiss on her cheek. You'll spoil my reputation with such praise. Praise you deserve. He straightened the ruby necklace with practiced fingers. Every lord at court speaks of your grace. Lady Helena appeared from the withdrawing room, adjusting her own gloves. The carriage is ready, darling. We must arrive before the Brennans. She smoothed Margot's sleeve, a mother's ritual of pride. Today matters. Seraphine had reached the hall's edge. She curtsied low, precise, invisible. Thornwood. Lord Corrin's nod barely grazed her. The tapestries in the east wing need attention before the ball. Yes, my lord. Margot's eyes passed over her like sunlight over stone warmth that touched everything except what lay beneath. Try not to be seen wandering during the preparations. The guests expect refinement. Yes, sister. The family swept toward the entrance, their laughter trailing behind them like perfume. Seraphine watched them go, then turned toward the service corridor. The linen room smelled of lavender and dust. She pushed through the heavy door, arms ready for the weight of fabric, and stopped. Nella Brine stood beside the folding table, a scrap of bread clutched in her hand. She was slight, brown-haired, her face plain and kind, hands red from washing, apron stained with soap. She started at Seraphine's entrance, then relaxed. Thought you might be hungry. Nella held out the bread, honeyed. From the kitchen's don't tell. Seraphine took it. The crust was warm still, sweet on her tongue. Thank you, don't mention it. Nella shrugged, already moving toward the door. We all see things, yeah? Just don't let them make you small. She vanished into the corridor before Seraphine could answer. The bread disappeared in 3 bites. Seraphine stood alone among the linens, the taste of honey lingering, and began her mental list. Prepare Margot's ball gown, mend the eastern tapestry, fetch water for the guest chambers, stay silent, stay unseen, survive. The bells rang. She gathered her arms full of sheets and walked into the cold morning, her gray dress swallowing her into the walls of the only home she'd ever known. The bells had barely finished their 5th ring when Seraphine found herself standing at the far end of the great dining table, hands folded, the smell of roasted goose and spiced wine thick in her air. Lord Corrin occupied the head of the table, his silver-streaked hair combed back, one finger tracing the rim of his goblet as he listened to his daughter. Lady Helena sat to his right, her gloved fingers resting on the table's edge, her smile fixed in that particular curve that never quite reached her eyes. Margot dominated the conversation, her voice carrying across the candlelit space like a songbird performing for judges. Lord Ashford's cousin swears the Alpha King will attend, Margot said, dabbing her lips with a napkin. Can you imagine? The Alpha King himself gracing our humble ball with his presence. Lord Corrin's eyebrows lifted. Ventheus, are you certain enough? Father, think what it would mean for Thornwood if Margot paused, letting the implication hang. If someone of proper standing caught his eye. The table murmured approval. Seraphine shifted her weight from one foot to the other, the floor cold through her thin shoes. Proper standing, Lord Corrin repeated, nodding slowly. Yes, a union with the Northern Realm would secure our position for generations. He turned, finally, toward Seraphine. Not to address her, but to issue instruction. You'll attend to the preparations, girl, ensure everything meets standard, and stay out of sight. We can't have guests wondering about additional family members. Yes, my lord. Lady Helena's gaze flickered toward Seraphine, a brief disturbance in her composed features. Something moved behind her eyes, recognition perhaps, or memory, before she lifted her wine and let the glass shield her face. Margot noticed, her smile sharpened. Seraphine. The name sounded strange in her mouth, almost foreign. You'll wear that gray thing again, won't you? It suits you. She tilted her head, all false sweetness. Invisible is what you do best. The table absorbed the comment without reaction. Lord Corrin returned to his meat. Lady Helena studied her wine. Seraphine's throat tightened. She felt the heat rise to her face, then recede. Years of practice at receiving such remarks had taught her body to absorb the blow and keep working. Yes, sister. She moved to collect the plates, her hands steady despite the clenching in her jaw. The silver was heavy in her hands as she carried the first course to the service door. Nella stood in the corridor just beyond the glow of the hall. Her face had hardened into something Seraphine had never seen there before, a quiet fury, her lips pressed thin, her eyes fixed on the dining room as if she could burn it down with looking. Don't, Seraphine murmured as she passed. It's not worth. It is worth something. Nella's voice came low and rough. They shouldn't be allowed to speak to you so. They're allowed. That's the problem. Seraphine pushed through the door into the kitchen, the weight of the plates anchoring her to the moment, to the work, to the small mercy of having a task that demanded her attention. The kitchen fire crackled. The cook shouted orders. Somewhere behind her, Margot's laughter rang out again, bright and cruel, and Seraphine disappeared into the rhythm of service, becoming what they had always demanded she be. Invisible. Silent. Small. The candle on Seraphine's narrow desk had burned to a stub by the time she finished the final stitch. She held Margot's gown up to the fading light, examining her work, the hem now flawless, the silk smooth as if untouched by time or accident. A small prayer, as always. Let the evening pass without incident. A soft knock. 3 taps, hesitant and quick. Seraphine startled, nearly pricking her finger. She set the gown aside and crossed to the door, opening it a crack. Nella stood in the corridor, her calloused hands clasped before her, something folded tucked beneath her arm.
I shouldn't be here, Nella whispered, glancing down the empty hallway. But I had to bring you this.
She stepped inside before Seraphine could object, closing the door behind her. In the dim light, the fabric in her arms caught a shimmer, dove-gray silk, finer than anything Seraphine had ever touched, finer than anything she deserved.
Where did you get this? Guest quarters?
Lady Ashford left it after the last visit. It was meant for alterations, but Nella held it out, arms extended. You should wear this, not the gray servants thing. This. It's, you deserve to be seen, even if just for one night. Seraphine's breath caught. She stepped back, shaking her head. It's too fine. I'll be punished if they find out. It's not my place, Nella. I don't care about their place. Nella's voice stayed low but firm.
I've watched you scrub their floors and mend their clothes and make yourself smaller than a mouse for years. One night.
That's all I'm asking. Seraphine stared at the silk. It lay in Nella's arms like water, like moonlight, like something from a dream she'd long stopped allowing herself to dream. They'll mock me. They'll let them mock. Nella stepped closer, pressing the fabric into Seraphine's hands. Let them see what they've been hiding. Let them choke on it. The silk was impossibly soft against Seraphine's palms. She felt the weight of it. Not heavy, but significant. A small rebellion. A crack in the walls she'd built around herself, or that others had built around her. She allowed herself, just for a moment, to imagine it. To imagine walking into that ballroom not as a ghost, but as someone who existed, someone who mattered. I don't know how to wear something like this, she admitted, her voice cracking on the last word. Nella smiled, a rare, warm thing. Then let me help. She gestured for Seraphine to sit on the narrow bed. Seraphine obeyed, her hands still cradling the silk against her chest. Nella moved behind her, and Seraphine felt fingers rough from work but impossibly gentle begin to thread through her dark red hair. I've never, as Seraphine started, I know. Nella's voice was soft, almost reverent. That's precisely why tonight matters. The brush of fingers against her scalp, the careful arrangement of waves, the whisper of silk being draped across her shoulders, each sensation landed like a small miracle. Seraphine's eyes burned. She refused to let the tears fall. Tonight, Nella murmured, securing a final pin, you matter. The mirror showed a stranger, or perhaps the self she'd forgotten existed. The gray silk caught the candlelight, turning her skin to porcelain, her hair to ember. For one breath, one heartbeat, she was not invisible. She was seen. The courtyard hummed with music and laughter as Seraphine slipped through the servants' entrance, her dark cloak pulled tight around her shoulders. The silk beneath whispered against her skin, a secret she carried close. Inside, the ballroom blazed. Crystal chandeliers dripped light across marble floors, and the air hung thick with perfume and ambition. She found a place near the outer columns, where shadows pooled and light barely reached. From here, she could see without being seen, the old survival tactic. Margot dominated the space near the dance floor, her ruby necklace catching every flicker of candlelight, as she laughed at something Lord Ashford's son had said. She was magnificent in crimson, a predator in silk. Lady Helena hovered nearby, her smile fixed, her eyes tracking every interaction like a hawk watching a field. Lord Corran stood apart, exchanging nods with men in darker coats, fellow lords, fellow schemers. The three of them performed their roles flawlessly, as they always did. Then the air changed. It happened all at once, a ripple that started near the doors and spread inward like a stone dropped in still water. Conversations faltered, heads turned. The orchestra's melody seemed to thin, overwhelmed by the weight of silence. He stepped through the entrance, and Seraphine understood for the first time what the stories meant when they called a man a king rather than merely naming him one. Caelventhus moved through the crowd with the ease of someone who had never questioned his place in any room. His dark hair caught the light. His shoulders filled the space between nobles like a blade sliding between ribs. A faint scar marked his left temple. His eyes, silver-flecked, sharp, swept the room with the patience of a hunter who knew his prey had nowhere to run. Seraphine's breath stopped. She pressed deeper into the shadow of the column, her palm flat against cold stone. He was looking for something, or someone. The thought arrived unbidden and ridiculous. She dismissed it immediately. The Alpha King had no reason to look at her, not when Margot was already gliding toward him, her smile radiant, her curtsy a masterwork of performed grace. Your Majesty, Margot purred, her voice carrying just enough to reach nearby ears. What an honor! We weren't certain you'd grace us with your presence. Cale inclined his head in acknowledgement, but his gaze had already moved past her, scanning the room with increasing intensity. Seraphine's heart hammered against her ribs. She should leave. Now. Before anyone noticed her standing there in borrowed silk, before the mockery began, before... His eyes found hers across the ballroom. The world narrowed to a single point of contact. Silver met ember. Something tightened in her chest, a sensation like a rope pulled taut between 2 points she couldn't see. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stand there, caught in the weight of his attention, while the music swelled around them and Margot's smile faltered at the edges. Margot's voice cut through the murmur of the crowd like a blade. You... The word spat from her lips, sharp with disbelief. She's a servant, a halfling, she's nothing. Cale moved. He simply walked past Margot as though she were furniture rather than a lady of the house. His gaze never left Seraphine. The crowd parted for him the way water parts for a ship's prow. Instinctively, inevitably. Seraphine couldn't run, couldn't think. Her legs had rooted themselves to the marble floor, and all she could do was watch him approach, this king who looked at her as though she were the only real thing in the room. The distance between them collapsed in heartbeats. Up close, she could see the silver threading through his eyes, the faint scar at his temple, the controlled power in the set of his jaw. He stopped an arm's length away. Dance with me. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of command, not a request, a statement of fact spoken aloud for the room to hear. She stared at his outstretched hand. The calluses there spoke of weapons, of battles fought and won. This was a hand that could destroy houses, that could reshape kingdoms. It was also trembling. Seraphine placed her fingers in his. The moment their skin touched, a current raced up her arm, a sensation like coming home to a place she'd never known existed. Her breath caught, his eyes flared, silver brightening to white. The crowd's reaction dissolved into static. There was only this. His hand firm around hers, his other arm sweeping around her waist, drawing her toward the dance floor. She stumbled once, and he caught her with an ease that suggested he'd been holding her weight his entire life. You feel it, he murmured, his lips close to her ear. I knew you would. The orchestra found its rhythm again, a waltz sweeping and grand. They moved together, his body leading, hers following without thought. It felt natural. It felt inevitable. I have been searching for you, he said, low enough that only she could hear. And now I have found you. His hand pressed against the small of her back, firm and sure. You are mine. The words should have frightened her, should have felt like a cage. Instead, they felt like a key turning in a lock she'd carried since birth. Around them, the ballroom erupted. Whispers crashed against each other like waves. Seraphine caught fragments. The king, the halfling, did you see? Impossible? But they all seemed very far away. Margot stood frozen near the center of the room, her face mottled with red. Lord Corin looked as though he'd swallowed something bitter. Lady Helena clutched her handkerchief, her composure in tatters. None of it mattered. For the first time in her life, Seraphine was not invisible. She was not the shadow in the corner, the servant girl, the mistake. She was seen fully, undeniably seen, and the weight of that recognition was both terrifying and exhilarating. The orchestra swelled around them, but Seraphine heard only the thunder of her own heart. You are my mate, Kale said, his voice absolute, carrying the weight of sovereign certainty. Before all of these witnesses, I claim you as such. The bond has named you, and I will not release you. Her breath came shallow, too shallow. The room tilted. You don't know me. The words scraped out of her, barely a whisper. You don't know what I am. His hand pressed firmer against her back, steadying her. The bond knows you. I know you. His eyes held hers, silver flaring bright. Your bloodline, your status, your family's opinion, none of it matters. You are mine, and I am yours, and that is the only truth that exists in this moment. The waltz ended. The final note hung in the air like a held breath. Kale did not release her hand. He turned to face the assembled court, drawing her with him, and his voice rang out, clear, commanding, devastating. I, Kale Venthus, Alpha King of the Northern Realm, declare this woman, Seraphine Thornwood, my mate and future queen. Any who dispute this claim will answer to me. Silence crashed over the ballroom. Not a whisper, not a breath. The weight of his words pressed down on every soul present, suffocating and absolute. Lord Corian lurched forward, his face mottled with rage and something closer to panic. Impossible! She is. She is. He couldn't form the words. Scandal was too vast, too incomprehensible. His worthless daughter, claimed by the most powerful man in the realm. Margot stepped forward, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. She is a halfling. Her father was not a noble. Her blood is mixed, tainted. She cannot even shift. Her lip curled with contempt. She is nothing. The revelation slithered through the crowd like poison gas. Whispers erupted, cascading from mouth to ear. A halfling, mixed blood, unable to shift, disqualified by lineage from any honor, let alone a crown. Kale's grip on Seraphine's hand tightened, protective, possessive. His eyes turned toward Margot, and the expression there could kill if given leave. Her blood is no concern of mine. His voice dropped to something cold and final. She is my mate, and that supersedes every insignificant prejudice your family harbors. He turned to Seraphine, and his voice softened. Leave with me now. Leave this place and choose me. Choose us. Tears streamed down her face before she realized she'd begun crying. She looked back at the parents who had ignored her, at the sister who had weaponized her very existence, at the home that had never been a home. She turned away. Kale led her from the ballroom, their joined hands a declaration of war against the old order. Behind them, the ball collapsed into pandemonium. Chapter 2. The Garden Between Worlds. The garden swallowed them whole. Seraphine's heels clicked against the stone path as Kale guided her past climbing roses and through an archway carved with symbols she didn't recognize. The fountain appeared like a vision water catching moonlight, singing its quiet song into the night air. Jasmine wound through the walls, and the scent of it nearly broke her. She stopped in the center of the garden, arms wrapping around herself. The silk dress remained pristine, dust-free, absurd against the magnitude of what had just happened. Her body shook, delayed shock or something deeper she couldn't tell. I had to know. Kale's voice came quiet, stripped of the command he'd held in the ballroom. That you chose me, not because of the bond's pull, but because you decided. Tell me, do you want this? Do you want me? Her throat closed around words. Years of survival had taught her not to hope, not to trust kindness, not to believe that love existed without a hidden cruelty waiting to strike. How can you want me? The words scraped out. You saw what I am tonight. Worthless, lowborn, tainted, everything your people despise. Kale closed the distance between them. His finger lifted her chin, calloused and warm against her skin. Silver threaded through his eyes, flaring in the moonlight. The bond does not lie, and neither do I. His hand moved, pressing flat over her heart. You are the strongest, most resilient person I have encountered in my entire reign. Your bloodline is irrelevant. What matters is this abling, the pulse of the bond responded to his touch, a harmonic resonance, warmth spreading through her chest like sunlight through glass. Your family will try to reclaim you or destroy you, he continued. Letters, threats, attempts at negotiation, but you will never return to that invisible existence. From tonight forward, you are queen consort of the Northern Realm, and your word carries weight equal to mine. Tears streamed. She didn't wipe them. I don't know how to be loved. The truth warred against her survival instinct. I don't know how to trust that this is real. Then we will learn together. He drew her close, arms enfolding her against the night chill. I have spent years ruling alone, carrying the weight of a kingdom with no one to share it. I have been searching for you without even knowing your shape. Now I have found you, and I will not waste a single moment. They stood wrapped in moonlight, the boundary between their separate lives dissolving into something shared. Hours passed in conversation. Seraphine spoke of small cruelties, years of invisibility, the scars on her forearms from accidents no one ever asked about, the way her father's eyes would pass over her like she was furniture. Kale listened without judgment, his hand never releasing hers, his presence a steady anchor. Before dawn, he kissed her, not demand, not conquest, tenderness, a seal of partnership rather than possession. The kiss tasted like beginning, like all the futures she never imagined possible. She kissed him back. Sunlight sliced through the tall windows of Thornwood's grand hall, catching dust motes and turning them to accusations. Seraphine stood in the center of the room where she had once scoured floors, still wearing the dove-gray silk Nella had lent her. The fabric felt different now, heavier with meaning, lighter with freedom. Kale positioned himself beside her, his black coat and steady presence a wall between her and the family that had spent 2 decades making her small. Beyond the closed doors, she could hear the low murmur of armed guards, their swords a language of power her family understood intimately. Lord Corrin stood at the head of the hall, his face a mottled portrait of rage and fear. The morning light carved harsh shadows across his features. You have humiliated us. His voice cracked on the word, spat like poison. The Alpha King's mate should have been chosen from a proper house, with bloodline beyond reproach. Instead, you have revealed us as harboring a defective Kale's voice cut through like ice through water. The single word carried the weight of a throne. I did not come here to endure insults. I came to collect what is mine, and to make clear the consequences of any further attempts to claim or harm Seraphine. Margot stepped forward from the shadows, her crimson ball gown from the previous night now crumpled, her perfect curls falling loose around her face. The venom in her voice dripped thicker than her perfume. You can take her, but you cannot take the truth. Margot's eyes fixed on Seraphine with something between hatred and desperation. She is a halfling, unable to shift, unsuitable for any position of honor. The entire realm will know that their alpha has bound himself to a lesser creature. Seraphine felt Kale's hand tighten on her shoulder, a wordless offer of strength, a question asking if she wanted him to speak for her. She took a breath, feeling the words gather in her chest like stones she'd swallowed over years. I am grateful for my time in this house, for the lessons in survival it taught me. Her voice surprised her, steady, clear, carrying across the silent hall. But I am no longer the person who accepted your contempt in silence. I am Seraphine, mate of the Alpha King, and I will not allow my worth to be determined by your fear or your prejudice. The words cost her everything and nothing simultaneously. It was the first time she had spoken to her family with authority rather than submission. Lady Helena rose from her chair, composure finally cracking like old plaster. Seraphine, please, you are still our daughter. We can make amends. We never intended, and you intended exactly what you accomplished. Seraphine met her stepmother's eyes without flinching. You made a home that would have destroyed me. Kale has offered me something you never could, the chance to be seen and valued for who I am. Kale stepped forward, his tone cold precision. Seraphine takes nothing with her except what belongs to her personally. The matter of inheritance and future communication will be determined by her choice alone, not yours. If any member of this household attempts to defame her, to spread lies about her lineage, or to cause her harm, you will face royal justice. As they turned to leave, Lord Corrin's voice cracked through the room. You cannot simply steal a daughter of Thornwood and expect the realm to accept it. Kale paused at the threshold without turning. The realm will accept precisely what I decree. Your daughter is no longer yours to control, nor will Thornwood's reputation survive my displeasure if you test my patience further. The finality in his tone left no room for negotiation. A small figure emerged from the service entrance, Nella, her plain dress and work-roughened hands clutching a small bundle. She pressed it into Seraphine's arms, their eyes meeting in mutual recognition of a loyalty that had transcended rank. As Seraphine and Calla stepped through the front doors into the morning light, she looked back once at the estate that had never been home. The shame her family had carried, their cruelty, their neglect, their failure to see her, settled back onto their shoulders where it belonged. The courtyard erupted into organized chaos the moment Kale's carriage crossed the threshold. Servants scrambled from doorways, their voices overlapping in a chorus of urgent instructions. Messenger boys sprinted toward the eastern wing, their footsteps echoing off the pale stone as they carried news that would reshape alliances across the realm. Seraphine stood on the palace steps, the dove-gray dress clinging to her frame, her legs unsteady beneath her. The building rose before her, a fortress of pale stone and sculpted gargoyles, 1,000 windows catching the dawn light like watching eyes. Every corner held a servant, every balcony a sentinel. She was being observed, measured, judged. Kale's hand found the small of her back. This way. She followed him through corridors lined with tapestries that stretched ceiling high, centuries of his lineage rendered in thread and gold, wolves and crowns, battles and treaties, the weight of generations pressing down on her shoulders. Her breathing grew shallow, the walls seemed to narrow around her. Kale paused before a large mirror in an antechamber, his hands gentle on her shoulders as he turned her to face her reflection. The woman who stared back wore exhaustion like a shroud, dark circles beneath her eyes, her red hair escaping its pins. But the dress, the simple dove-gray silk, caught light in ways she had never seen, and for a moment she saw what he must see. Not a halfling, not a servant, something transformed by proximity to power. This is who I see, Kale murmured against her hair, a woman of strength, of truth, a resilience that will reshape this kingdom. The antechamber doors burst open. The High Council filed in elder nobles with faces carved by decades of political maneuvering. Their eyes swept over Seraphine with open scrutiny, cataloging her plain dress, her unmarked hands, the obvious absence of breeding in her posture. Lord Theron led them, a man of 70 winters with silver hair and eyes like flint. He bowed with elaborate courtesy, but his voice carried steel. Your Majesty, the unexpected development requires discussion. The matter of bloodline and the expectations of the realm. What I require, Kale interrupted, his tone absolute, is that Seraphine be treated with the respect due a queen consort. Her bloodline, her lineage, her fitness for this role. These are matters between me and her alone. If any council member cannot accept that, you may step down now. The silence that followed was absolute. Lord Theron's jaw tightened. One by one, the council members bowed their heads, their resistance crumbling beneath the weight of Kale's certainty. A woman entered from the courtyard tall, composed, dark-haired, perhaps 40 winters old. She moved with the precision of someone who had memorized every court protocol and made them her own. Your Majesty, she addressed Seraphine with a deep curtsy, I am Alara, your advisor. I serve at your pleasure. There is much to learn in little time, but I am yours to command. Seraphine nodded, the word majesty still foreign on her tongue. Something shifted in Alara's expression, compassion perhaps buried beneath professional reserve. Evening fell. Kale led her to the Queen's chambers, a suite of rooms larger than all of Thornwood combined. A fire crackled in the hearth candles, burned low, casting warm light across silk hangings and furniture that spoke of immense wealth. Seraphine stood in the center, trembling. I don't know how to be queen. I don't know how to rule, or speak to nobles, or make decisions that affect thousands of people. Kale took both her hands in his. You will learn, and you will never learn alone. But first, we must rest. You are safe here. He lifted her chin. More than safe. You are home. They retired to the royal chambers. For the first time in her life, Seraphine slept in a bed of silk and down Kale's arms around her, the bond between them a constant warm presence that quieted the nightmares that had haunted her for years. Alara arrived at the queen's chambers each morning with a leather satchel of documents, names, and protocols. She began with the great houses, their banners, their territories, the marriages and betrayals that had shaped allegiances across generations. The Duke of Heron holds the eastern trade routes, Alara explained, spreading maps across Seraphine's desk. He smiles at everyone and trusts no one. The Marchioness of Thornhaven sits on the council but never speaks first. Wait for her to commit, then frame your request as her idea. Seraphine listened, memorizing the web of names. She'd spent years watching from corners, learning to read the tension in a servant's shoulders before a blow fell, the false cheer in Margot's voice before a cruelty came. That same instinct translated now. She watched Ilara's eyes when she spoke of certain nobles, noted which names made the advisor pause. "You're observing me," Ilara said one morning, catching Seraphine's gaze. "I learned to watch. At Thornwood, it was the only way to survive." Ilara's expression shifted, surprise giving way to something like recognition. "Then you already understand what half the court hides. Good, we shall skip etiquette and move to strategy." The garden stretched behind the palace, a maze of clipped hedges and stone fountains. Kale walked beside her, his stride measured, his voice low as he spoke of wars fought and treaties forged. "The southern lords chafe at the border taxes," he said. "They'll test you first, to see if the crown has teeth. Don't yield, not because cruelty serves, but because weakness invites prey." Seraphine considered this, and if yielding serves peace, then yield with conditions. Make the compromise explicit so it cannot be reframed later. She filed these lessons alongside Alara's, building a framework for a role she had never imagined. One afternoon, Kale paused beside a marble bench, his gaze distant. "My mother established a shelter here decades ago, for children with nowhere to go, shifters cast out by their packs, halflings discarded by families too proud to claim them." Something tightened in Seraphine's chest. "The palace maintains it with gold, but no one leads it." I thought he stopped, looked at her directly. "I thought perhaps you might wish to see it." She visited that same hour. The shelter occupied a wing of the eastern courtyard, its walls weathered, its windows grimy with years of neglect. Too few attendants tended too many children, wretched, hollow-eyed youths who flinched at sudden movements. The air smelled of damp wool and boiled cabbage. Seraphine rolled up her sleeves. She organized the supply pantry, cataloging what arrived from the kitchens and what disappeared through pilfering hands. She taught the children to read, using the same worn alphabet books Nella had once pressed into her own hands. She sat on the floor and listened to their stories. Children abandoned at crossroads, turned out for showing wolfkin features, left to starve in ditches. They came to her slowly, drawn by the absence of judgment in her face. One evening, a girl of perhaps 8 winters, scarred, silent since her arrival, crossed the common room and placed her small hand in Seraphine's. The gesture needed no words. Seraphine's tears fell unbidden. She held the girl's hand and felt something shift in her chest, a purpose crystallizing into certainty. This was the work that mattered. Not courtly games, not political survival, but the simple act of offering shelter to those the world had discarded. Kale watched from the doorway, silent, giving her room to find her power in her own time. Weeks had passed since the ball, and the palace had grown familiar enough that Seraphine no longer startled at the echo of her footsteps in marble corridors. The resistance, however, had not faded. It had merely learned to wear smoother faces. Duke Meredith arrived on a Thursday afternoon, his delegation filling the council chamber with the weight of Eastern influence. He was a broad man, silver-haired, his posture that of someone accustomed to being heard. Behind him stood 3 lesser lords, their expressions carefully neutral in the way that signaled anything but. "Your Majesty," Meredith began, inclining his head with the precision of a man who understood theater. "We do not question the bond's validity. The realm celebrates your union." But Kale's voice carried the chill of winter stone. "No question, merely a concern. The queen consort's bloodline continues to fuel whispers among the merchant houses and minor nobility. A formal review by the High Lord Keepers might settle the matter, remove the doubt that clings like fog." Seraphine stood beside Kale's chair, her hands folded, her face arranged into the neutral mask she had worn at Thornwood. The old fear stirred in her chest, the familiar certainty that she was about to be found wanting. "There will be no review." Kale's words fell like a blade. Seraphine was declared my mate before the entire realm at midsummer. Her legitimacy is not a matter for examination. What is being questioned here, Duke Meredith, is my authority as Alpha King. The silence that followed was absolute. Meredith's expression flickered, surprise, then calculation, then a careful retreat. Of course not, Your Majesty, I meant no offense. Then consider this my answer. The council is dismissed. That evening, Seraphine found Kale in his study, documents scattered before him, his jaw tight with barely contained anger. She told him what she had heard in the corridors. The servants' whispers, the nobles' pointed silences. Perhaps they are right, she said, the words tasting like ash. Perhaps I am too much of a liability. The realm needs a queen who brings power and prestige, not a halfling survivor with nothing to offer. Kale rose, crossed the room, took her face in his hands. I did not choose you for political gain. I chose you because the bond named you mine, because your strength and integrity exceed everyone at court combined. Everything heals. The realm will accept you, because I decree it and because they will see what I see. But words alone would not suffice. He began to place her where her worth could not be denied. She mediated a dispute between merchant families, her understanding of poverty and compromise revealing itself in a settlement that left both parties feeling heard. At a formal dinner, she spoke of protecting vulnerable populations, the orphaned, the displaced, the half-bloods discarded by proud families, her voice carrying the weight of personal experience that no polished court speech could replicate. The turning point came with Ambassador Corvin of the Southern Reaches, arrived to negotiate renewed trade accords. Seraphine seated herself beside him, asked questions about his homeland's harvests and traditions, listened with the attention of someone who understood what it meant to be overlooked. By evening's end, Corvin had pledged continued alliance and spoken openly of the remarkable wisdom of Cal's chosen mate. Word spread. The resistance softened. Seraphine's presence at court began to feel less like an aberration and more like inevitability, as though she had always been meant to occupy that space beside the throne. The garden received them like a held breath. Moonlight poured silver over the fountain, and the roses along the ancient walls released their fragrance into the cool night air. Seraphine followed Cal through the archway, her pulse quickening, not with fear, but with the particular anticipation that this place always invoked in her. Cal stopped beside the fountain's edge. He turned to face her, and in his hands rested something that stole the breath from her lungs, a circlet of silver and moonstone, delicate as spider silk yet carved with patterns that seemed to shift and breathe in the pale light. This is the token of the queen consort, he said, his voice carrying the weight of ritual. But before I place it upon your head, I need to ask you something that I should have asked the night of the ball. Her heart stuttered. The old instincts surged, brace for abandonment, brace for revelation of some hidden cruelty she had failed to see. Her hands trembled at her sides. Instead, Cale lowered himself to one knee before her. The gesture shocked her still. A king kneeling was unthinkable, and she reached for his arm, trying to urge him up. Seraphine Thornwood, he spoke, and his voice carried no command, no royal authority, only careful tenderness. I bind myself to you by choice and by bond. I ask you, with all the authority of a king laid aside as simply as a man who loves a woman, will you have me? Will you build a life and a reign with me? Will you accept the circlet not as a symbol of the realm's judgment, but as evidence of my devotion? Tears spilled down her cheeks before she realized she was crying. She had learned through weeks of his unwavering protection and genuine regard that love was possible. The bond that had seemed like fate had become, through daily choice, a partnership. Not obligation, but mutual desire. Yes, she whispered, the word breaking around her tears. Yes, I will. Cale rose and placed the circlet upon her head. The moonstone caught the moonlight and seemed to glow from within, casting soft luminescence across her features. He drew her close, and their lips met beneath the fountain's gentle spray, all the tenderness of a true union sealed not by command, but by mutual choice. I love you, Seraphine whispered against his mouth, the words terrifying and true. I never thought I would be capable of saying those words without fearing punishment or mockery. You are capable of anything, Cale replied, his thumb brushing the wetness from her cheek. And you are loved beyond measure. The news arrived at Thornwood Estate like a blade slipped between ribs. Lord Corrin stood in his study, fingers white around the parchment. The words blurred, Ambassador Corvin's praise, the successful mediation, the Queen Consort's growing influence in council discussions. His daughter, the halfling, the one he had ordered to remain invisible. He crushed the letter in his fist. "Summon Margot," he commanded the servant who lingered in the doorway. "Now." Within the hour, Margot stood before him in the main chamber, her ruby necklace catching light from the windows. She had worn it deliberately, her finest piece, the one that had always announced her arrival. But something in her father's expression drained the color from her powdered cheeks. "You called for me. Read this." He tossed the crumpled parchment at her feet. Margot retrieved it, her eyes scanning the contents. Her jaw tightened with each line. When she finished, she began to pace, her silk skirts swishing against the stone floor. "She has turned him completely. The Alpha King is besotted, and the court follows his lead like sheep. She has made us irrelevant." "She was always irrelevant," Lord Corin growled. "That was the point, and now she is everything." Margot's voice cracked. While I am nothing. Do you understand? Every lord who might have courted me now speaks of her. The suitable matches have dried up. I am the sister of the queen consort, and no one wishes to be associated with the family that discarded her." Lady Helena entered from the adjoining room, her posture impeccable as always, a handkerchief pressed to her fingers. She had been listening. She settled into a high-backed chair with the careful grace of someone bracing for impact. "She survived by becoming invisible," Lady Helena said, her voice carrying an edge none of them had heard before. "Now she is visible, and she has thrived. We should have recognized her strength instead of burying it." The silence that followed was suffocating. Lord Corin stared at his wife, the truth of her words settling like stones in his chest. He had built his house on certainties, bloodline, hierarchy, control, and his daughter had shattered every one of them without raising a finger. "Write a letter," he commanded, moving to his desk, "to the palace. Congratulations on the union. Suggest we might gather to celebrate properly." Margot's eyes widened. "Father, do as I say." The letter was dispatched by evening courier. Its words were gracious, even humble, a remarkable performance from a man who had never apologized for anything in his life. 3 days later, the response arrived. Seraphine read it in the solar, Kale beside her. She turned the parchment over twice, searching the lines for something genuine. She found only strategy dressed in silk. "What do you wish to do?" Kale asked, his hand warm on hers. She considered the question. Forgiveness was a door she was not ready to open. Not yet, perhaps not ever. But severance felt like giving them power over her still. She wrote her response herself, brief, dignified, courteous but distant. She accepted their sentiment while making clear that reunion required time and change she did not yet see. The reply reached Lord Corin that evening. He read it once, then set it down. His hands did not shake, but something behind his eyes had gone very still. The letter demonstrated with perfect composure that his daughter no longer needed his approval. She had moved beyond him entirely. The grand hall of the northern palace had never held so many bodies at once. Ambassadors from the western provinces stood alongside southern trade envoys. Northern lords filled the front rows, their furs and sigils announcing lineages older than the castle stones. Beyond them, lesser nobles crowded the galleries, whispering behind gloved hands. Seraphine felt every eye. Kale's hand found the small of her back as they crossed the threshold. The hall fell silent, not the polite hush of courtly courtesy, but the absolute stillness of people waiting to witness something they would remember for generations. They ascended the dais together. 2 thrones waited there, identical in height and ornamentation. Seraphine's fingers trembled slightly as she took her seat. The circlet on her brow caught the light from the massive windows, sending silver fragments dancing across the walls. Kale rose. The silence deepened. "I present to you Seraphine Venthus, queen consort of the Northern Realm, mate of the Alpha King, and my chosen partner in governance." His voice carried through the hall without effort. "From this day forward, her counsel will carry weight in all matters of state. Those who respect me will respect her. Those who serve this realm will serve her with equal devotion." The words settled over the assembly like a decree from the gods themselves. No debate, no council vote, just the spoken will of the Alpha King, backed by the weight of generations. A heartbeat passed. Then Lord Theron stepped forward, bowing low. "We accept the Queen Consort as our own." Others followed. Ambassador Corvin approached first, his smile genuine. "You have earned this, Your Majesty. The realm sees what I have seen. Dukes and duchesses, trade representatives, and military commanders, they came in a steady stream throughout the afternoon. Some offered stiff bows, their respect mechanical but present. Others lingered, speaking of her work at the shelter, her mediation with the southern lords, the way she had listened when others would have lectured. By evening, Seraphine's cheeks ached from diplomatic smiles. She escaped to the courtyard as twilight deepened. The air carried the scent of late autumn pines, and the first stars emerged above the palace turrets. She stood at the stone railing, looking out at the kingdom she now helped rule. It felt impossible. It felt inevitable. Cale found her there, his cloak settling over her shoulders before she felt the cold. "Are you afraid?" he asked, terrified. She did not look away from the horizon, but not of failure. "I am afraid of becoming what Thornwood was, of losing sight of what it means to be on the margins, to be invisible, to be deemed worthless. If I let that fear disappear, I might become cruel in the way I was crueled to." He stood beside her, close enough that their arms touched. "Then we will build a reign that remembers that fear. We will build a kingdom where the invisible are seen and where compassion is not weakness but strength." She turned to him, the circlet catching the starlight. "You believe we can? I believe we must try." Chapter 3. The New Order Rising. The morning light poured through tall windows, illuminating the main chamber of what had once been a forgotten corner of the palace grounds. Seraphine stood near the hearth, watching children move through the space with something she had never seen in her own childhood: a sense of belonging. Younger ones clustered around a wooden table, learning their letters from a patient tutor. Older children sat in quiet groups, some reading, others sketching. The walls, once bare stone, now displayed their artwork, bright paintings of horses, castles, and families that existed only in imagination. A boy of perhaps 12 approached her. His name was Cale, and he had arrived at the shelter 6 months prior, abandoned at a mill and left to starve. Under her tutelage, he had learned to read, slowly, stubbornly, refusing to surrender to letters that had once meant nothing. He held a rolled parchment, his fingers trembling slightly. "I wrote something," he said, "for the letterbox. I wanted you to read it first." Seraphine unrolled the parchment carefully. The handwriting was uneven, the spelling inventive, but the meaning was clear. A letter to a father he had never known, expressing hope that perhaps one day reunion might be possible. She read it twice, her vision blurred. "This is beautiful." She placed her hand on his shoulder. "He had arrived in Hida, and you are brave for writing it. You deserve to know your father, or at least to know that you tried. The world is changing. We are changing it so that children like you are not cast aside." Cale's chin lifted slightly. "Do you think he'll answer?" "I think the act of writing matters more than the reply. You have already given yourself something no one can take away: the knowledge that you tried." He nodded, then hurried back to his seat among the other children. Cale stood at the chamber's entrance, arms folded, watching. His expression remained neutral, but his eyes held a warmth that needed no translation. He had given her the resources to build this sanctuary. She had given the children within it a reason to believe they mattered. The formal ceremony took place that afternoon. Nobles from across the realm filled the courtyard, their finery a stark contrast to the simple stone building behind Seraphine. She stood before them, the circlet catching the autumn sun. "This shelter exists because every child deserves to be seen," she said, her voice carrying across the assembly. "Not for their bloodline, not for their usefulness, simply because they exist. Invisibility is a violence we have tolerated for too long. This place is our answer to that cruelty." Lord Theron stepped forward, exchanging a glance with the other council members. "The High Council pledges additional funding for expansion. What was once a modest project has become a matter of state necessity." Ambassador Corvin nodded beside him. "The realm sees your vision, Your Majesty." Seraphine looked toward the shelter's doors, where small faces pressed against the windows, watching. She raised her chin. The evening had settled heavy over the palace when the letter arrived. A servant delivered it on a silver tray, sealed with wax pressed into Margot's personal insignia, a rose entwined with thorns. Seraphine stared at it for a long moment, her first instinct to destroy it unread. The impulse surged through her fingers, hot and immediate. But she paused. The handwriting on the envelope was shaky, the ink smudged as though written through tears. Something about that imperfection stayed her hand. She broke the seal. The words blurred before her: "Seraphine, I write not to beg your forgiveness, which I have no right to expect, but to acknowledge what I have come to understand too late. You were never small. Never worthless, never the shadow I named you. I was the small one. Small in spirit, small in courage, small in my ability to see another's strength without fearing it might diminish my own. You have become queen through your own merit and the Alpha King's wisdom. The realm speaks of you with respect and admiration. I hear their words, and I remember mine, and I am ashamed. I do not ask for reconciliation. Yapsal. I ask only that you know that someone in your family has finally seen you. Not the version I created through mockery, but the version you have always been, strong, true, worthy beyond measure. I hope, perhaps, that one day we might speak, but I understand if you choose never to grant me that gift. Your sister, Margot Shea, read it twice more. Each reading revealed Layer's genuine remorse tangled with the self-centeredness of Margot's need for acknowledgement. The letter was not purely an apology, it was also a plea for absolution that Seraphine was not yet ready to grant. The sadness that crushed her was not for Margot, it was for the years of cruelty that Margot's own insecurity had driven her to inflict, for the time that could not be recovered or repaired, for the sister who might have existed if cruelty had not been weaponized, if compassion had been prioritized over social status. Cal found her sitting on the edge of the bed, the letter crumpled in her lap, her composure fractured. He read it silently, then sat beside her and gathered her into his arms as the grief moved through her. Do you wish to respond? He asked gently, his voice low against her hair. Not yet. Her voice was hoarse. Perhaps one day I will be capable of forgiving her. Perhaps one day I will even be capable of seeing her as something other than the instrument of my invisibility. But today I am still too raw. Today I must simply acknowledge that she is trying and that her trying does not erase what she did. She leaned into him, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart against her cheek. The wisdom had been hard won, the recognition that healing was not a single moment but a process, that forgiveness was not obligatory, and that one could honor another's growth while maintaining boundaries necessary for one's own survival. The grand hall had been transformed. 6 months ago, Seraphine had entered this space through servants' passages, invisible as shadow. Now torches guttered in sconces along marble columns, and the entire realm had gathered lords and ladies, ambassadors and servants, children from the shelter seated in the front rows with wide eyes. Kale stood on the dais, his dark coat catching the light like polished obsidian. He surveyed the assembly, then raised his hand. 6 months ago, I claimed this woman as my mate, and in claiming her, I claimed a transformation that would reshape my reign and my heart. His voice carried through the silence. Tonight, I wish to renew that claim, not as an assertion of dominance, but as a declaration of mutual choice and unwavering devotion. He extended his hand toward Seraphine. She crossed the floor. Each step felt like a reclamation, not of power taken, but of power claimed. The crowd parted for her as it had once parted for Kale, but this time the whispers carried wonder rather than contempt. When she reached him, Kale drew her into his arms. The kiss that followed was neither brief nor performative. It was ownership in the truest sense, mutual, absolute, tender, and passionate all at once. His hand cradled her jaw, her fingers curled into the fabric of his coat. The bond between them hummed through the room, unmistakable, undeniable. When they parted, Seraphine turned to face the assembled nobles. I came to this palace a shadow, believing that invisibility was my nature and my fate. Her voice steady, clear, carrying to every corner. I have learned that invisibility is a choice made by others, and that visibility is a right earned through survival and claimed through courage. She paused, letting the words settle. I will use the position granted to me not to replicate the cruelty I survived, but to dismantle it. Her gaze swept the hall, catching on Lord Theron, on Ambassador Corvin, on the faces of servants who had once looked through her. Together with your Alpha King, I commit to building a realm where the marginal are centered, where compassion is strength, and where every person, regardless of bloodline or circumstance, is granted the chance to matter. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, slowly, the realm rose. Hands clapped. Voices rose in acknowledgement. Some wept openly, others simply nodded, recognizing the shift that had been building since the night of the ball. In the back of the hall, Margot Thornwood stood among the diminished party her family had been granted. She watched her sister command the room with words that carried the weight of justice. She had been wrong. Not in the moment of cruelty, but in the foundation of values that made cruelty seem necessary. The moon hung full over the garden, silvering the roses and turning the fountain's cascade to liquid light. Kale and Seraphine walked the familiar path together, her hand in the crook of his arm, the circlet on her head catching gleams from above. They had returned here so many times since that first night, seeking quiet, seeking each other, seeking the intimacy that public life made precious through scarcity. But tonight, the space felt different. Not a refuge from the realm, but the private heart of a public transformation. They settled onto the stone bench beside the fountain. Seraphine adjusted her circlet, and the moonstones caught the light, throwing tiny stars across her hair. 6 months, Kale said, his voice low amid the water's murmur. It feels like a lifetime. It feels like no time at all. The children have grown, Seraphine said. Kale's handwriting has improved. The silent girl, Lyra, she spoke her first word yesterday. She said, my name. Kale pressed a kiss to her temple. You have given them something no one gave you. I am trying. She leaned into him. There is so much still to do. The council approved funding for 2 more shelters, but there are children in villages beyond the capital who have nowhere. We will reach them, he said, one step at a time. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the water, feeling the bond between them settled now, deep rather than desperate. It had been urgency and discovery at the ball, fire in the garden that first night, tenderness through the months of learning each other. Now it was something quieter. Partnership, home. Kale turned to face her. His silver-flecked eyes held the question before he spoke it. Are you happy? Seraphine considered the word carefully. Happy was a simple thing, a surface thing. She was not happy in the sense of being free from pain or struggle. She carried within her the scars of Thornwood, the memory of invisibility, the knowledge that cruelty existed in the world and would not disappear simply because she had risen above it. But I am alive in a way I was not before, she said finally. I am seen and valued and trusted with power. I have purpose beyond mere survival. I have you, and you have me, and between us we are building something that matters. She met his gaze. That is not simple happiness, but it is something deeper. It is meaning. It is belonging. It is the knowledge that my life signifies. Kale's arms came around her, pulling her close. She felt the bond pulse, not with urgency, but with contentment. They had moved beyond discovery into the deeper territory of partnership and mutual growth. She thought of the children in the shelter, the girl who had finally taken her hand, the boy writing letters to a father he might never know. She thought of a future where those children grew into adults who believed they mattered, who refused invisibility, who built lives rooted in the knowledge that they were worthy. She thought of her family at Thornwood, her parents learning to navigate a diminished social position, Margot writing letters of remorse that might or might not lead to reconciliation. She thought of Nella, now a valued member of the palace staff, her small act of kindness transformed into a larger legacy of compassion. The quills scratched against parchment, and Seraphine scratched out the words again. Dear Margot, she crossed it out. The word dear sat wrong in her mouth, even in private. 3 weeks had passed since the letter arrived. 3 weeks of turning Margot's words over in her mind, of starting and stopping, of admitting to Kale in the dark hours that she did not know how to forgive someone who had made her life small for so many years. You don't have to forgive her, Kale had said one night, his hand warm on her back, but you can choose what comes next. She had stared at the ceiling, thinking of the girl who had stolen her bread, who had locked her in the cellar, who had whispered that she was worthless every chance she got. I know, she'd said. That's the problem. I can choose. Now, in the study, morning light slanted across the desk. Seraphine had filled a dozen pages with false starts and angry drafts. Some had been too cold, some had been too warm. One had devolved into a list of every cruelty she could remember, and she had burned that one in the fireplace, watching the words curl into ash. Kale had read 2 of the drafts. The first she had thrown away before he could finish. The second he had read in silence, then looked up at her with something that might have been pride. This one, he'd said, this is true. She had not believed him. She had rewritten it 4 more times since. The current draft sat before her now, the ink still wet in places. She read it through once, then folded it carefully, sliding it into an envelope. The wax seal pressed the palace crest into red wax, her seal now, as much as his. She summoned a messenger, a young man with quick eyes and a respectful bow. Deliver this to Lady Margot Thornwood at Thorn Hollow, she said. No one else is to open it. The messenger took the letter and disappeared down the corridor. Seraphine stood at the window watching the road that led north. Somewhere beyond the hills, Margot would receive this. Somewhere, the possibility of something other than enmity would take root. She did not know what would grow from it. She did not know if anything would. But the letter was sent, and the word had been given, and for the first time in her life, Seraphine understood that she had done everything she could. The rest belonged to time, to choice, to the uncertain future that awaited them all. The ritual had become sacred to her. Each morning, before the court stirred and before the council chambers filled with petitioning lords, Seraphine climbed the palace steps to the courtyard's edge. The stone was cold beneath her bare feet. She had taken to removing her shoes for these dawn vigils, feeling the ground connect her to the realm she now served. Below, the world stirred awake. Distant markets along the riverfront began opening their stalls, merchants hauling crates of apples and bolts of cloth. Smoke rose from village chimneys in the valley, where farmers walked toward their fields with hoes across their shoulders. Children spilled into village squares, their laughter carrying on the wind. She watched it all with the particular attention of someone who had once been invisible. Somewhere in the realm, a girl was being told she did not matter. Somewhere, a child was learning that their existence was a burden, that their blood made them less than whole. Seraphine carried that knowledge like a second heartbeat. It fueled her determination to expand the shelter, to change the narrative, to tear down the society that taught invisibility as a virtue. But this morning, she also saw kindnesses. A servant in the lower courtyard offered bread to a beggar at the gate. A merchant in the village extended credit to a struggling family, waving away repayment. Two children by the well shared a single apple, breaking it in half with solemn seriousness. The realm was not broken, it was sleeping, waiting to be woken into something better. The chill will catch in your lungs. Kale's voice came before his footsteps. He appeared beside her, dressed in simple morning clothes, his hair still damp from the basin. He took her hand, and she felt the bond pulse between them, no longer the shock of discovery but the steady warmth of partnership, the unspoken understanding that had grown through months of shared governance and quieter moments in the dark. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his voice soft against the morning hush. She considered the question. Below them, the sun crested the mountains, spilling gold across the realm like a promise being fulfilled. "I am thinking that I survived Thornwood so that I could change the world," she said. "I am thinking that my invisibility was not my nature but my circumstance, and that changing circumstance changes everything. I am thinking that we are only at the beginning of what we will accomplish together." He squeezed her hand. No words needed. The bond carried what language could not. The sun rose fully, flooding the courtyard with light. Seraphine lifted her face to it, feeling warmth replace the chill. She was no longer shadowed, no longer unseen, no longer believing that her worth was contingent on others' acknowledgement. She was the queen consort, and more importantly, she was Seraphine, survivor, lover, builder of sanctuaries, defender of the invisible. She had claimed her place not through conquest but through survival, through love, through the daily choice to be the person she needed when she was marginal and forgotten. The work of transformation was endless, but this dawn marked the threshold where invisibility became agency, where survival became purpose, where the rejected daughter became the guardian of those the realm would cast aside. Seraphine Venthus, queen consort of the northern realm, looked forward into a future she was building with intention and with hope, understanding finally and completely that she had always mattered, and now the realm knew it too.